Hi, I'm Ink. I use they, them pronouns. A short visual description. I am a white, queer, trans, disabled creator, storyteller, activist, theatre troublemaker. I'm wearing black trousers, blue daisy dress, and some layers and a beanie. I have dark, short hair and a beard. I sit with a cane. And some headphones. Sometimes I tick and sometimes I stim, but we are having a good time. I started in using art and theatre, more specifically within climate activism, quite a few years ago, but as a way of making it accessible to me at the time. I didn't necessarily know that that's what I was doing. I just know that I couldn't really do what I was being asked to do by the groups I was in. And so I started doing this as my own thing. And then over the years, I'm now the artist for change climate crisis at Eden Court Theatre up in Inverness. That's who I am and that's where I'm coming from. I'm now gonna pass on down this lovely line of lovely people. If you could just introduce yourself, your name and your pronouns, a short visual description, that would be great. And then we'll head on to presentations.
Okay, so I guess I'm the first. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Dufour. Visual description. This is something I've never done in my life, so I'll try. I'll look very girly, long brown hair, quite Mediterranean, really smiley, and so happy to be here. This is what I'm going to say. I'm creative climate producer with Creative Dundee. This is a very new role for me. I've been working with Creative Dundee for a long time, but that role is very new to me, and I guess it reflects a really interesting and great ambition of the organizations to look at climate change and what we can do in a creative way. So that's really cool. I'm the project coordinator for the Culture Collector project. Our project is called CULTIVATE. And in a nutshell, what we're trying to do with it is to engage communities with climate justice through creativity and peer education. And in a really practical way, we're doing that by working with community partners around the Tayside region. So Angus, Dundee, Perth and Kinross, and northeast of Fife. So we've got 6 community partners and 7 creative practitioners that are collaborating with those community partners and the local communities to look at creative responses to climate change, but with a very socially engaged and participatory practice, really looking at the social injustices in the same regards, because climate change impacting people in lots of different levels and mostly people that have the least say and the least doing in so. And today I'm coming with one of our creative practitioners that is going to maybe telling more about the hyper local actions and collaboration that they're doing. And one aspect that this project has is also kind of networking all of those projects and people together for kind of regional learning, sharing, all of this good things. I'll pass over to you, Nicky.
I'm Nicky Bolland. My pronouns are she, her. Short visual description, I am a white woman in her 30s, early 30s. I'm wearing a red jumper, miniskirt and red shoes. And I've got a notepad on my lap to make me look more prepared than I feel right now. And I am a creative practitioner working in Ailith in Perthshire. And yeah, just really excited to be here.
Cool, thank you. Demask, there's one.
I'm sorry, I forgot to do that.
I'm going to keep forgetting. It's going to be musical chairs. My name is Linus Rowe. I'm non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. Let's think. Short visual description. I've got long hair. I'm wearing all black, kind of toasty clothes for foraging in. And I'm working with Govan Hill Bats as one of their 4 and now 5 artists, working across the community in different community groups. And I'll leave it there for now.
Hi everyone, here in the room and on Zoom. I'm Ellie Harrison. I'm an artist based in Glasgow, and I am conveniently entirely in black today. I'm a white woman. You can call me she or her or they, I don't mind. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about my work in a minute.
Hello everyone, my name is Martin. My pronouns are he, him. Short visual description, I've got short dark hair, a receding hairline with a thinning amount of hair, but we refuse to acknowledge that. I'm wearing a blue zip-up hoodie and blue jeans. I am the creative producer for Open Road Limited's project based up in Aberdeen called Safe Harbour Open Sea.
Hello, I'm Geraldine. I use she, her pronouns. Visual description, I'm wearing brown hair in a bun. I'm a white woman in my 30s. I'm wearing a bright pink jumper with a small grease stain just visible. And I work with Martin in Aberdeen on the Safe Harbour Open Sea project. And we'll tell you more about that in a minute.
Thank you very much. As Ellie alluded to, we're going to start by hearing about some of Ellie's work. So if you want to let us know what you get up to, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Ink. So yeah, as I said, I'm an artist. I'm based here in Glasgow, and I moved here in 2008, 13 years ago. Like a lot of artists who go to Glasgow School of Art, I did a master's in fine art at the art school, and actually that time was like a really formative experience for the sort of work that I'm doing now. And the backdrop to my time studying was COP15 in Copenhagen in December 2009. So I guess that was the first time that I'd had the time to reflect on what these climate negotiations were all about. I was studying fine art, and I was really questioning why on earth I decided to kind of head down that career path when we didn't have the phrase the climate emergency back then, but it's definitely climate change. There was definitely global warming. And there was a growing sense of urgency that we needed to be cutting carbon by all costs. And what was I doing kind of going down this career of being an artist? So I started to try and change my work in response to that. And a few things I did. So I wrote my own environmental policy in 2010. It's still up on my website. I need to update it actually because things have changed. But it was a way of kind of making public everything that I was doing on an individual level to try to reduce my carbon footprint. And I also started to invest a lot more of my time in activism. So just kind of direct political campaigning, and specifically around public transport, which became my total passion. So I launched a campaign in 2009 called Bring Back British Rail, and it was all about trying to popularise the idea of bringing the railways back into public ownership to deliver a much better service and to bring down the cost of fares so that travelling around the UK by train just becomes the default and not using short-haul flights, which are obviously a nightmare for the climate. So I've been doing that since 2009. But I'm probably best known for a very controversial project that I did in 2016 called the Glasgow Effect. So it was a kind of protest against, well, in a way, the way my own life was turning out, in that I found that I was travelling around a lot, that I wasn't spending a lot of time in Glasgow, that I was getting a lot of work in other parts of the country or internationally, having to travel, breaching my own environmental policy, which has quite strict strict quotas in terms of how much travel I'm allowed to do. And I thought, enough is enough. Like, I'm supposedly living in Glasgow, so supposedly where I've made my home, I'm not going to leave for a whole year. And it was controversial because I got funding to do it. So I got a £15,000 grant from Create Scotland, which caused outrage. But in the grand scheme of things, for a year-long project, it's actually less than the Scottish annual salary. So it's not a ridiculous sum of money to live off for a year. But it was also because I'd called it the Glasgow Effect, and that was a phrase that I'd taken from the field of population health, which I'd become aware of a few years earlier, but it basically referred to, at that point, a then unknown mystery as to why people in Glasgow had worse health outcomes to people in very similar post-industrial cities in England. So the population health researchers compared Glasgow to Liverpool and Manchester, which are cities that have very similar levels of poverty and deprivation, similar sized cities, and they didn't know why people in Glasgow had worse health outcomes. So I was very interested in that, and obviously wanted to find out more about it while I was staying here, and to start to join the dots, I suppose, between health and well-being and some of these environmental concerns, and just to make visible the connections between social and environmental injustices. And yes, I did have a very privileged life as an artist travelling around the world, and I was forcing myself to stay in Glasgow for a year, and that's one reason why people were so angry about what I was doing. But that was part of it, really, exposing that own privilege and making the connections and making it clear that actually it is the most privileged people in the world who are causing by far the most damage to the environment. It's the people who are over the other side of the river in the cot right now, who have flown in from God knows where to be there. They're the problem. And they're the ones that actually need to stop. Just stop. So yeah, that's a bit of probably enough of an introduction for now.
So to follow up on that, I would like to pose a question, if that's okay. When I was looking through all of your work, one of the things there's a lot of it, because you've been doing this for so long, which is really cool. But that was leading me to think about how things have changed and where are we now. And this is about this event is about starting points. So I was like, okay, we need to work out where we're starting from. You have a book that was published a while ago, and it's been re-released very recently. How has the shift in dynamics around the climate and art and how the two fit together, how has that changed from when it was first published to now?
I'm glad you asked me about that visual aid book. So yeah, after the Glasgow Effect project was in 2016, so that's 5 years ago now. 5 years ago I was coming to the end of it. For quite a few reasons. It was quite a traumatic experience, and I had quite a lot to process after the end of it. And one of my harshest critics at the time was Darren McGarvey, Loki, the Scottish rapper, who then went on to write a book called Poverty Safari, which was kind of inspired by the controversy around the Glasgow Effect project, because I was accused of going on a poverty safari in Glasgow because the Daily Record got the wrong end of the stick that I was from London. I am from London, but I hadn't been parachuted in just to do this project. I had already been living here for 7 years at the time. But I was really inspired by Darren's book, and I felt that reading it was a really good way to connect with him and where he had come from. And it just felt at that time that maybe write my own book would be the only way to try and process everything that had happened, to respond to like Darren's criticisms, but also the final part of the book is a manifesto for the sustainable city of the future. So like the final third of it is based on kind of analysing all the problems that I had identified in the city, offering solutions for how we could build a more equal, more sustainable, more connected city. So the book came out 2 years ago, actually November 2019, which was mixed reviews. People do like send me nice emails about it, and then I think, well, it's probably only people who've enjoyed it that actually bother to get in touch with me. But I know that it's made an impression on some people. But of course, like just a few months after that came out, we went into the pandemic and lockdown happened, which in a way was quite similar to the restrictions that I'd imposed on myself in 2016, that everybody was forced, whether they liked it or not, to stay local, to only make essential journeys, and, you know, at the very strictest times, like, well, definitely not use public transport, but try not to drive too much at all. So I think everybody had been through that experience and had started to appreciate their local areas in a lot more intensity than perhaps before. And also, you know, a lot of people had time to get involved in local activism during the pandemic as well. So I think that shines a sort of new light on what I was doing, but also since then as well, the idea of the 15-minute city or the 20-minute neighbourhood, which is actually now Scottish Government, it's in their programme for government that they're going to create these 20-minute neighbourhoods, like they said they're going to do it. And that concept of like just living and working within a very small radius that I was trying to sort of do and live in 2016, you know, that is the answer to the climate emergency. So it's great to see that's happening. And of course, like, we now have the phrase the climate emergency, which really didn't exist in 2016. Got Greta to thank for that, and also XR, which kind of popped up in 2018. But I think it's the right phrase to be using because it really gets across that sense of urgency. So this version of the book had just come out yesterday, actually, with a sort of new foreword that's reflecting on the pandemic and also talking about COP. And one reason why I picked the title, The Glasgow Effect, is because I don't think it's the role of artists to be like to act like the tourist board for a city. You know, we should be critiquing the places where we live, not like promoting them. And that I saw that as my role, and also to sort of uncover a lot of the hypocrisy, not just in the council, but in the Scottish Government as well. And the thing about the 20-minute neighbourhoods, I think, is infuriating because so many like local community venues are now under threat of closure as a result of the pandemic, which is the opposite of what we want to do to build a 20-minute neighbourhood. We want to be opening these new venues so people don't have to travel so far. So the Scottish Government might say something, but then they've got to actually do it.
That would be a really good jumping off point. Do you want to, Linus, would you be up for sharing a bit about your work here as the most local of us?
Yeah, of course. Would it be okay to do a bit of an introduction about my practice? Or would it be okay to just jump straight in on that point? What would be easier?
Whatever makes the most sense for you, because you know the most about what you do.
Cool. I think it'd be good to just contextualize kind of my work and who I am a bit as well. So I think it's important to say I'm from Liverpool originally, and I grew up in a very deprived area of Liverpool called Tuebrook, right next to an old demolished power station. It was hilarious. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and yeah, I grew up in a kind of, it's a very hard environment to picture. I think it's what a lot of people think about with Glasgow in the 70s and stuff like that as well. We had, you know, one of these, this sounds like I'm starting this event, but you know, one of those, you know, I was grim up north, we had 1 bar of soap. But to be serious, it was we had one tree that grew outside, and I always remember we used to play outside in this tree before Liverpool City Council blocked up the entries behind the houses and said kids couldn't play there anymore because it was antisocial. And this one tree that we used to play around gradually died over the whole time I was growing up, and it was the only tree. And I remember the last year before it died, it kind of lay these beautiful seeds, or it kind of gathered all these seeds, and I had never seen seeds like that before or since. And it took me a very long time until I was an adult, many years later, a couple of years ago, when I was in Brighton, and I found out that they were the seeds of an English elm. So it was probably one of them which have all been killed by, of course, Dutch elm disease, which is caused in part by global warming and the climate emergency. So in terms of me as a person, I grew up in a very working class area, and I grew up with stories about my granddad, climbing on the back of coal trains in the morning as a kid to throw coal into his backyard as it went past the house because he couldn't afford coal. And I kind of had this upbringing, really being aware of the fact that I was working class and that this whole world was very inaccessible to me. To this day, I've actually made it part of my practice now, but I've never been on a plane, I've never flown, I've never been abroad. And I think I'm going to try and keep it that way for now, actually. And as I was growing up, when I was about 18, kind of moved into an abandoned rubber factory for a bit with some artists, and it was my first real experience after dropping out of school of kind of what was then very popular called socially engaged art, and working with artists that are working in communities. And I was introduced to the book Playing for Time, Making Art as If the World Matters, which is edited by Lucy Neal, who I think at that time was the correct me if I'm wrong, someone, but I think head of Battersea Art Centre. And that was the first thing that got me into this world, because I was reading these books. I was reading about projects like the Rewilding Wolf Project, Dougie Strangon, Rannoch Moore, and the Life Current Project, and all of these different incredible artists. Your work was in there as well, Eat 22, I think. So this is a bit surreal as well. And I remember reading this book and thinking, right, that's it, I'm going to go to art school. So I, with no qualifications, kind of just got a train to London and walked into Central St. Martin's and was like, I want to study here, please. Got told to leave by security, then stayed there until someone came down, and I essentially talked to them about where I was from, what my background was, why I wanted to study there, what I thought studying there would be, and I got offered a place unconditionally, but the person who was interviewing me said it's going to be very hard for someone like you to study here. And that was the experience I had. It was very difficult. I was very overwhelmed by this kind of neoliberal London art world. And all of the thoughts that I had and all of the really inspiring things I was reading about, and it was just battered away all the time. It was like, that's not relevant. That's not what we're here to do. It was very commercial basis. And it was actually one of the things I do now as an artist. I forage a lot, and genuinely that started in London because I didn't have enough money to eat, because I had to work all the time to be in London, and I was hungry. I was walking around going, all this stuff in the trees, I'm sure I could eat some of this. And genuinely that's how all of that started. And the key to the practice that I've kind of got now is, for my degree show in London, I got very interested in the history of the building because I'd long given up on trying to do anything there. And the area that it was built on used to be Black Alder Bog, and I won an EKO bursary because of the circumstances I was in and because of what I was trying to do. And I turned the little plot that I'd been given for my degree show into a little cross section of the Black Alder Bog. So I got a living black alder tree and a wildflower meadow that I spent a very long time sourcing organically with living soil. And I left that there almost kind of as a protest. And I then moved to Glasgow because that's where my partner lives, and that's where quite a few of my friends were. I was already going backwards and forwards. But to bring it into what my practice is about, I'm really interested, kind of what I'm studying, in, I guess what I say is I'm very interested in the idea of seeding new mythologies or re-enchanting the world. I am really interested in storytelling. I'm really interested in narratives. But the main thing that I want to talk about with all of this, with this fantastic project and Culture Collective and everything like that, the thing that I'm really interested in is reimagining the artist's social role. And if anyone sees me scroll on my phone, I'm not tweeting or anything. I've got some notes I'm just going to be referring to a little bit. When we're talking about what does climate change mean for small communities or for local communities, things like that, I am interested in the artist as a social being. And I think one of the things we've seen from across communities, whether that's Indigenous people who have travelled into Glasgow, whether that's local people here, we are incredibly disarticulated from the natural world and from our local environments. I mean, I don't know, a lot of people tend not to realize this, but the UK is actually one of the most nature deprived countries on earth in terms of the lack of biodiversity. The creatures that have already been hunted to extinction and removed, even compared to France or Spain. We are actually the fastest deforesting country on earth. We're losing our forests are left at a rate that's faster than the Amazon, and nothing has been done about that. It's still getting stripped away now as we speak. So what I'm really interested in as an artist is working in communities at the heart of all of that. What I'm doing in Govan Hill, me specifically, I'm working as a group of now 5 artists, but my area is, as well as the artists with an environmental focus, I'm working with the queer community. So that's kind of across a few different groups. There's a queer reading group operating out of Gamys that I'm getting in touch with soon. And there's a fantastic gardening group run by Martha with the help of Govan Hill Bats. And that's been working with the Seed Library. So the things I'm kind of really interested in is ecological activism, saving seeds, getting people engaged with foraging, wild plant medicine. As well as doing this, I'm currently studying for a diploma in Western herbal medicine, which is not the pseudoscience evil tell people they can cure illnesses. It's very the scientific basis for Western pharmacology. But I want all of this to be distributable as much as possible amongst communities. And one of the things that I work to imagine is there's a tremendous group of people who are removed from our social, historical and cultural imagination. There are the people who are called peasant rebels, witches, leaders in the folklore imagination, people at the Battle of Cable Street, that kind of thing. All of these people have been removed from communities because they're effective in organising them against what has happened to all of us and left us in this situation where we're on the brink of multi-species, including human extinction. And my work and what I'm trying to do is segue, bring people into that. I believe wholeheartedly in that there's this kind of cliche, everyone can be an artist, but I think that everyone should have the tools available to become artist activists. And my envisioning of what an artist is someone who is embedded within communities that they live in and can help be a positive agent of social change. That's why I imagine it as, and I've been very, very lucky that I've been welcomed into Glasgow as my home as well. And I hope that answers the question and was also coherent enough. But
of course. Yeah, no, do you hear links between about artists working with stories and everyone having those tools? Is there links there within your work?
Yeah, definitely. The way we look at our whole project, because it's that thing like there's the responsibility of the individuals and what we can do in our kind of own life and capacity, and then the responsibility of our government and the big polluter and the big institutions. And it's kind of like this, it's always kind of shifting from one to another. And it's not saying that we're not doing enough, it's just that I think that having the capacity and the resilience to do something is giving us hope and that activism force to push change. So that's very much the way we're looking at our projects. When we talking about creative responses to climate justice, we're not expecting the local communities to come up with like amazing, brilliant ideas to tackle climate change. It's more about helping them building that resilience to look at what are the hyper local challenges and how to help them adapt. So it's more in that adaptation and how to have hope in the future and imagine like a better future. And in the storytelling, but I really like how science fiction can influence people's minds and how we explore the future as well. Because the science fiction that we read when we were kids so it was all about going to the moon and flying cars and all of those things. And they're kind of happening because of that. So what if we were doing a hopeful, caring, community-led kind of science fiction that can inspire the next generation as well, and creating new leaders. I don't know if you want to add anything on your
I think a lot resonates in speaking to the local context we're working in. So I'm working in Ailith, which is a small community in Perthshire, and it's a community that's very impacted by flooding. And so 5 years ago, there was a really big flood that was, so I think that's a really important story in the history of that community, and how that's created a narrative. But ironically and tragically, there was another flood. So a piece of artwork around climate change was opened at the weekend, and then the village flooded just on Sunday. So, all that, bringing that back. But I think what's really interesting is being in community and hearing those stories about the flood and how the community pulled together and the responses that have come from that and the resilience, and really, really strong foundations. But when questions are asked about climate change or about these things, often the community say, we're not doing, we haven't got a response to that. I don't feel I'm doing anything. I'm still driving. And actually, I feel like some of my role as an artist is to hold the mirror up and say, actually, you've got it. There's so much here to work with, and that already exists. And it's, I think sometimes it is about sharing that story as a story of power and community. Does that answer some questions?
That's perfect. And it feels like a really nice moment to draw that together and take a wee break if we want to, and then we can come back afterwards. Next, we have something very exciting.
Oh, sorry. On or off?
Perfect. Now we're all back in the room. I can see we have something very exciting in front of me. I'm not quite sure what it is, so I'm just going to let Martin and Geraldine explain a bit about their project and what they're up to.
I'm going to set up.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about our project. So we started working in the village of Fitty in Aberdeen in July this year. Fitty is a 200-year-old coastal village. It was a planned residential development for the fisher folk of Aberdeen, and is currently home for about 160 residents. So there are 5 of us in the team, and each of us are exploring our own strand of the project. So Geraldine here is focusing on the community aspects and engaging the community. We've got Victoria, our colleague, who is the other creative community worker, who is looking at the themes of storytelling and migration. I'm heading up the environmental strand. It's all being overseen by Leslie Ann, who's a project coordinator, and our early career creative producer, Marie, is doing lots of work behind the scenes to hold it all together, and she's also running our weekly community choir. So I think Geraldine's got some questions for me.
We had prepped it. We had prepared it so that I would ask Martin questions from over there, but then it's hard for people to hear us. But I can just do it here, because now that's going, so now I can be with you. So you've told us a little bit about the project. Can you tell us, how did you introduce the project to the community?
So, we were really keen for the community of Fitty to feel like they had some ownership over the project. So the first thing that we did was listen to what they had to say. So we met them at one of their summer fairs in their village hall, and we held a stall there and opened some dialogue with them about what kind of activities they wanted to see in their village. And we started to cast some of the themes that we thought were going to come into the project into our conversations there. We invited them to start to imagine what the future of the village might be like. We invited them to start to write down messages for future residents in the village, and to really just start imagining, start thinking beyond their own, but beyond the now and beyond the present, and to start thinking into what future awaits us. From there, we developed a taster weekend of different events. So we had a film screening of the Icelandic film Women at War. We also launched our community choir, which is currently running on a weekly basis. And we had a creative storytelling event. Since then, we've also developed and delivered a sustainability workshop around the themes of Roman Krasnarik's book, The Good Ancestor. And just last night, we hosted a carbon literacy training session for the community to tie in with Carbon Literacy Action Day.
Sounds great, Martin. But we're a project that maybe have been running slightly longer than some of the other projects. So we thought it might be useful if you could tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you've faced so far.
There have definitely been some challenges so far, but not too many, which is good.
Do you want me to go?
They're in there somewhere, hold on. Fitty is based right on the coast of the North Sea. Some of the residents have got back doors that open onto the beach and the waves are right there. It's a beautiful sight, but that makes everything around climate change slightly sensitive, quite a hot topic for the community. So we're trying to handle that sensitively, but at the same time address it with some urgency and some honesty about how much we definitely have to address this situation. Like a lot of small villages, Fitty has its own unique politics and relationships, and we're trying to be mindful of that as well when we're working in the community. We would like to leave the village hopefully no more so divided than it is when we walked into it. And what was really clear, one of the first things one of the residents told me was, regardless of all of this, that community spirit still shines through. That if someone is hurt or if someone is in need, that whole community, regardless of their different views, pull together to help that person in the time of need. That's something that we're trying to harness in our sustainability and environmental work, is that these people clearly care about the community, they clearly care about their home, and they care about each other. And that's something that we're really trying to harness in the work that we're doing. And a lot of our environmental work has been around exactly that, has been about imagining the future of their village. There's so much conservation work that goes on there, and trying to get them to think that little bit further into the future. How are we going to protect that in 50 to 100 to 200 years? And what kind of other changes might we have to take to make sure that their village is still going to be there and it's still going to be safe in that time? I've got one question for you, Geraldine. Why is there a fish tank here?
So, one of what I think is one of the luxuries of being an artist on a project is not having to know exactly the answer to that question. However, I do have a sort of answer, and when Martin ran the sort of Good Ancestor workshop, looking at what will the village look like in 200 years was one of these questions, and it's really uncomfortable talking to people about that when it's their homes and their history and their families, and sort of trying to ask, well, what do you think the village will look like in 200 years, when the reality is it will probably be underwater. Which is also particularly emotional for me because I also grew up in the village and my parents live there. So I was like, how do we have these like really uncomfortable conversations? Because they are really urgent and we do need to talk about it. But if we just go head on with like, your home is going to be underwater in 200 years, that's not a very good way of starting a conversation. However, what if we tried to imagine what the village might look like underwater? Something you were saying about sci-fi, we had this discussion the other day about sort of what is the sort of sci-fi version, and so then I started thinking about like DIY sci-fi movies and how I could visualize the village underwater. And then I was like, well, what if I just got a fish tank and a wee trolley, and then I could take it around the streets of the village and film it, and then I could see if that looks like it's the village underwater. And maybe it will, and maybe it won't, and I've only just got the fish tank because I bartered last week for it, and we've only just got the trolley, so it might not really work. But I think even if the sort of action of pushing the trolley and the fish tank around the village is definitely going to offer me an opportunity to have conversations with people about why I'm doing it. And so then when we knew we were coming here, we were like, oh, we could do that, and then we can imagine what an event like this might look like in the future, and if the sea level rise is intense. So that's why we did this. So now I've made a short document of it. I'll send it, Morgan, on to you. That's kind of us.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you. We're gonna open it up now to a bit more of a discussion with everyone, and so we are taking questions. If you have questions, also questions through Zoom. I want to give people a bit of time though to like digest everything. I know that I never have questions straight away when someone's like, "What do you think?" For me as an artist, what's really one of the things that's really important is like identifying the climate stories that I want to tell, like acknowledging that that graphs and statistics and equations are all climate stories, but like we've had those for like we've had the beginnings of those since the 1800s, and we're still here just now. So obviously they're not quite working, and this is a starting point, but you've all come from other starting points, such as sci-fi, and now you're taking these starting points to communities. So what are the stories that made the climate accessible to you that now you're taking to other communities? Aware of time, so we might not have time to hear from everyone, but if you have an immediate like, oh yeah, it was this thing, then feel free to jump in.
I'll start. For me, it wasn't a thing, but for me, it was about the way we telling the story about climate change. And I think that creativity, culture, arts, and all of those like brilliant minds and talents that are trying to look at the world in a different way, what they bring into the conversation is positivity, is hope. And because all of the things that we uttered with is scare stories, and if you're scared and anxious about the future, then you'll shut down and you'll be like, nah, this is not my problem. I cannot do anything about it. I can't impact other people's behavior or other like big pictures behaviors. So that's where I think that is the role of artists and creative practitioners could be a really important, is that positivity, that they also really good at taking inspiration from natures and you know, like the living around us. They really help us getting that diversity in all the stories and perspective and voices that we want to hear about that. And also they help us go back into, connect back with our feelings. Because climate change is not just, those numbers, but it's like, how do we feel about it? And how do we help each other feel okay about it?
I kind of agree. And I think part of why because my role wasn't specifically about climate when I applied for it. And I think it's become a sort of overarching thing for the whole project, and I think I've actually quite often found it really difficult to look directly at, and that's kind of why I'm trying to find the stories that I want to tell, because quite often I feel like the things I've done in the past, it's like, actually I don't want to just be like, look at this great thing that this project are doing. Like I made a film about a cycling project and was like, this is really positive and a really hopeful thing. But that doesn't mean that you can stop. Like, sort of, how do you keep that, like, not like doom or sort of sadness in it, but the reality of it? How do you, like, not just be like, it's fine, but also be like, do things,
Yeah.
things they've done. Yeah, so that's not quite the answer, but yeah.
Mask again. I think for me, it's this idea that I was kind of touching on earlier about seeding new mythologies and storytelling. So I think one of the things I kind of got interested in my practice a bit earlier on was this idea of incorporating experimental archaeology, which, to cut a long story short, is trying to do things with the tools people in the past used. So, for example, maybe using a stone axe to try and whack down a bit of a tree, that kind of thing. And that sounds a bit bizarre, but it gives you an insight into people in the past and how they would have operated, how they would have done things, and the time that they would have been, for example, forced to spend in a certain environment, that kind of thing. One of the things I was thinking of relevant to your work is the archaeology done around Doggerland, which is the strait of land that used to connect, the North Sea, to Europe, and all of the finds that there, villages and entire communities, are now just completely lost to the archaeological record. But trying to reimagine them, I think one of the things you can immediately do with anyone is take them out foraging. I think we have this really deep-seated biological ability to forage, and I think it's very meditative. And I think that's just something you can automatically do that gets people very engaged, because it's just a skill that we all have kind of latent inside us. And yeah, I think that would be the main thing. I think taking people outside like that.
I think my 10-month son would also attest to that. He's a keen forager. I think linking into what you're saying about the importance of story and mythology, a project that, I guess, thank you, really struck home for me is a neighbour or nearby the Galgale project as an example of a project that really understands the importance of belonging and story and connection to past, but also as a way to look to the future and creativity. And I think coming across that project really inspired me, in terms of the importance of those things. And I think they're doing really exciting. I think the other element that really interests me is the importance of play and disruption. And I think Galgale, obviously that maybe people don't know the history, but that came out of Pollock Free State, and I understand they've just declared the Govan Free State just yesterday, the first. So they're doing really interesting things, and I think there's real power in some of that. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that question as well?
If you have something you'd like to share, then
I don't know
go
how
ahead.
many other questions we've got waiting for us, because we've only got 1 minute, apparently. Okay. I guess in its simplest terms, I wrote a story, but I think what I wanted to do is, because the project that I did in 2016 was so taken out of context that I felt like I had to explain where I was coming from, like literally, also metaphorically, like how this idea developed. So the first 2 parts of the book are written, from a very personal perspective. I weave in like personal and political histories, but it's quite a naive voice at the start, maybe a naive voice at the end as well, but I'm trying to sort of communicate how I learned these things, and when it first dawned on me that we really needed to cut carbon by all costs, and so it is a sort of a story of discovery, for want of a better word, and how I, in order to communicate that and to try to make other people to have those same realizations. But then, interestingly, like in the third part, like the personal narrative just like drops away, and it's much more about this kind of collective vision for the future, and because I think that's what we need to do, and obviously we need to work together to build a far more equal and sustainable city and world.
Talking about working together, I just wanted to check in with all of you and see how you're getting on, and if anyone has any questions. Perfect.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Ellie, in terms of the Glasgow effect. I don't know if, in terms of the public health Glasgow effect, did you look into that? Did you kind of discover what that effect is?
just before I'm going to repeat the question so the people on Zoom can hear. So that was a question for Ellie, and it was about whether you got to a resolution of public health and the Glasgow effect.
Yes, well, I thought seeing I was writing a book called The Glasgow Effect, I'd better cover a lot of the research that's been done by Glasgow Centre for Population Health. We're the main body they kind of coined the phrase, and they coined it really, although they regret it now because they hate the way that people like me have taken it on board and sort of transformed its meaning. But when it was initially coined in 2008, it was really to try to entice more people to research this and to get to the bottom of why it was happening. So quite by coincidence, in 2016, they published a report which is called History, Politics and Vulnerability, explaining excess mortality in Glasgow and Scotland, which I thoroughly recommend to anybody who's interested in that, where they claim to have kind of solved the mystery by synthesising 40 different possible reasons for why this could be the case, obviously comparing to Liverpool and Manchester. And it's not a simple answer. No, it's the result of lots of different complex things. But one of the things that I really, the two things that I really picked up on that they claim are one of the two key reasons. One is the rate and scale of urban change in the post-war period that was inflicted on Glasgow, and the fact that so many inner city tenements were knocked down and people were moved out of the city centre to peripheral housing estates or to new towns. And one of the reasons that was lots of reasons why that was problematic, but one was kind of that these people were now outside and out of mind, and therefore didn't get the investment that they needed, didn't have the facilities that they needed locally, and these new housing estates got run down very quickly. But also because these really tight-knit communities were smashed up, that a real sense of working class solidarity was sort of destroyed. And actually, compared to Liverpool, keep pointing at you, hope you don't mind. It's because, and the Liverpool example is really interesting. It links into what happened in the 1980s, sort of during Thatcher's reign, is the way that Glasgow City Council responded to Thatcher, which was basically, although, because it was a Labour establishment, Labour had been in power since the 1940s or something, a very long time, that they had stopped kind of acting in the interests of the local people, and they implemented a lot of Thatcher's policies. They didn't protest against them, whereas in Liverpool, the Labour Council that were in power there just said no, and they refused to put into action a lot of the policies that come from the central government. And the whole city felt united, felt that they were standing out to Margaret Thatcher, and it created a real sense of solidarity. And this is actually cited in the report, and that these kind of tight community bonds is actually what creates resilience, it is what creates stronger communities, and it actually improves health. So I found that fascinating because the link to activism is there, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, and I've, since the Glasgow Effect, have helped to launch lots of local campaigns, particularly around public transport, but also a local renewable energy cooperative, and the act of doing those things has actually made me feel more connected to the city as well. And I want everybody to feel like that they can get involved in this kind of local community projects, because not only does it help to improve the city, but it also helps to improve individuals' health as well.
Sure. Yeah.
If there's time to very quickly just jump in and add something, what I would say as well, my experience growing up, I was born in 1996, is that Liverpool had a lot of leftover solidarity until New Labour came along and tore the heart out of Liverpool. And one of the things that I found incredible in Glasgow is the amount of social cohesion and community focus that is still embedded in a lot of different communities, especially in Southside. one of the things I found completely bizarre working with Govan Hill Baths is that I grew up right next to a beautiful Edwardian swimming bath and library right next to each other, and the council closed them down. And I just remember as a kid going past the statue of Edward Lister that was in there, and people used to put what they called the sweets. They used to put like lime sweets over his eyes, like pennies, all these strange things. I remember finding it incredible, and it was all just taken away from us. And what I found incredible at Govan Hill is how people there, when the exact same thing happened with the New Labour taking it, the community said no. And, you know, the occupation of Govan Hill Baths is still the longest occupation of a building by the public in British history. And I just wanted to say, just as a jump in, I find it really incredible that that happened here, but in an almost identical situation in the part of the Dufour I grew up, it just didn't. I think it's really interesting with Glasgow in mind and what people are like here as well.
That links really nicely into, we've got a final question from comes through from Zoom, from Chrissy Ruckley. And the question was, what gives you hope? And for me, I've never quite understood hope as a feeling. For me, hope is a verb. It's a doing. It comes from the things we're doing. Like, so this is hope here now. The world is moved through muscles, like my muscles and your muscles, and hope lives in the tendons of the muscles that move the world. So when we're talking about all these things that have worked for me, that's what hope is. So I really appreciated this question, but I wanted to add a framing to it. I hope you don't mind, Chrissy, of what are the magical moments that have come up so far on the time that you've been doing these projects. Where is these moments of hope within your projects, and if you're thinking to the future, then what would you hope magical moments will come up, if that makes sense? And just quick last thing, you're all doing incredible things, and this is the last question before we hand back to Morven. So if you do have anything you'd like to plug or share, or where people can find your work, then that would be great, because I'd like to know it too. So selfish question. On you go.
Oh, okay. It's so interesting you're talking about magical moments, because I asked that questions to our steering group, so all the community partners and creative practitioners and other people involved in the project. And I asked them, what were the light bulb moments of like when you started caring about climate change and what you can do about it? And everyone said there was no magical light bulb moment, it's just something that you built. And I just, like infiltrate into you. And I love what you're saying about the fact that hope is not something that you have, but it's something that you do. And because I had the same revelation about love, and something that came up from the same discussion with the same group is that what we really need to do is care and share the care with everyone else and lead with love. And it's the doing, it's not the having or the being. And I'll leave it to that.
Thank you. Mic and mask. A magic moment for me was working alongside somebody who didn't have confidence that what they were doing was valuable, and it really, really was valuable. But the magic moment for me was that they were able to see that was valuable. And I think that, that maybe throughout this project, connecting to people and being able to say, this is great, is a really nice privilege.
The writer and activist George Monbiot wrote that ecological restoration is an act of hope, and I really agree with Ink's definition of hope as something that we're all doing right now. And I think as well, touching on this idea of magic, one of the etymological roots of magic is to do something that suspends the ordinary rules of the world. And I think that these moments are some of the most inspiring things. If we look at the community groups that come in together, if we look at the seed saving groups, a really important moment of hope for me has been watching the real desperation to engage with nature being fulfilled across the community. And that is something that's been really inspiring and powerful for me to be able to be part of as well, because for a lot of my work in the past, trying to keep this brief, it's been very solitary, but I've been acting with the hope that I will meet more like-minded people, and this has just been so much stuff happening for the past couple of years. It's been incredible to watch, I would say.
You all forgot your plugs.
Yeah.
I won't plug my book again. But I guess I want to do a plug for an event that's happening here tomorrow night about public transport. I mentioned I'm passionate about public transport. I helped to set up the Get Glasgow Moving campaign, which I'm still heavily involved in. We're campaigning for a world-class, fully integrated and affordable public transport network for the whole of the region. And COP itself has given me quite a lot of hope because of, and I actually write these words in the foreword of my book, but the eyes of the world are on Glasgow. And I don't know if people are in the Twitter sphere, but you may have seen that the delegates are getting free multimodal travel passes, so they can travel on any mode of public transport for free during their time here. And this has quite rightly got a lot, like created a big scandal because it's obviously something Get Glasgow Moving's been campaigning for 5 years. And it's really just drawn attention to the fact that it is possible for the government to do it, but it's only possible when the elites of the world are coming here and actually need a decent service. So that gives me real hope that this moment of Glasgow in the spotlight is actually going to say, well, if we can do this for 2 weeks for the people that are coming here, we can do it for the people who live here. So tomorrow night in the Deep End, 6:30, we're doing an event about transforming public transport to fight climate change. That's something that gives me a lot of hope.
Great. I think hope within the context of our project, I think it's just walking into a community who I've felt really supported by. There's so much passion in that community that we're working in, and seeing them develop their understanding. We had a conversation yesterday about they've got a community garden, they've done all of this work around community gardening, and they had never really linked that up with the fact that that was a good thing for the environment. That was always seen as a social, part of their kind of social outreach, that it brought people together and it was a good activity for people to do. And them realizing, I think being able to connect people within that community together and people realizing that they're not alone, that there's, they're not alone. There's a community of other people out there who want to support them, and that there's lots and lots more we have to do, but that also sometimes we're maybe doing more than we realize we are. And it's only when you take a moment to pause and look at what we're doing. We're making good, lots more to do, but we're making good progress, and that gives me hope. It can be done.
Feel quite a lot of pressure being last. I'd say I agree. Hope is an action, and a couple of moments in the project that have been really exciting. We've run a couple of film clubs, and people coming into the room. So they're all neighbours and they kind of know each other, but maybe they haven't seen the film or they don't know what it's about, and then the sort of sitting, talking with each other afterwards feels really great. And also, I guess my hope for the future of our project specifically is there's 2 kids in the village that I've been slowly developing a relationship with, and I hope that children in general are the thing that give me hope and give me motivation to be you're going to inherit this. So specifically the 2 kids that I've made friends with in the village, I hope that we can do something exciting for them so that they get to have a longer term with this beautiful world. The village specifically.